The candle was already half melted by the time they set the cupcake in front of me. One small, lopsided thing on a paper plate. No one sang. No one clapped. Heather pushed it down the table like an afterthought while scrolling through her phone. Reed didn't even look up. My granddaughter Sadie was giggling at a video on her tablet. I cleared my throat, ready to say, "Thank you anyway." It's the thought that counts. I started gently hoping to keep the mood light. That's when Reed looked up, right at me. His voice was flat but loud enough to quiet the room. "You're the most useless one here." The words didn't sting right away. They stunned, froze the air in my throat. Heather smirked. Well, someone had to say it. No one laughed, but no one spoke up either. My granddaughter didn't even glance up. I forced a smile. It felt foreign on my face. I guess that's my birthday wish then. Reed shrugged and went back to carving the roast. Heather stood to refill her wine glass, muttering something about how dramatic I always was. I looked down at the cupcake. The frosting had begun to slide, a waxy puddle forming at the base of the candle. I didn't cry. I didn't even sigh. I just picked up the cupcake, walked it to the sink, and ran the water until it disappeared. Crumbs, wax, and all. Back at the table, the conversation had moved on to Heather's new clothing line. Reed was bragging about how much they'd saved by having me around for free childcare and a cleaner. Still, no one looked in my direction. I wasn't sure what hurt more, that they said it out loud, or that it was clearly something they'd all thought for a long time. Later that night, I folded the worn sweater I always kept in the hallway closet. I placed it quietly into my suitcase beside the sewing kit I hadn't touched in years. It was time to stop pretending I belonged here. The guest room had once been a nursery, soft yellow walls, a faded decal of a cloud still peeling by the closet. Now it held my twin bed, a chipped dresser, and a small desk cluttered with bills I wasn't supposed to touch. I folded laundry in silence most nights, listening to the hum of a family I wasn't really part of anymore. Each morning, I brewed the coffee-packed Sadie's lunch, made Reed's breakfast the way he liked, extra bacon, no toast. I vacuumed, scrubbed, ironed Heather's silk blouses, took the dog out in the rain. When I got a thanks, it was usually from the dog. One night, I was wiping down the kitchen counters after everyone had gone upstairs. The dishwasher was still running when I heard them talking above me. Their bedroom vent must have been open again. "At least we get a tax break with her here," Reed said. Voice low. Heather laughed. "Right. She's basically our unpaid live-in maid. Plus, childcare," he added. "We'd be idiots to complain." I stopped mid-swipe, cloth frozen against the granite. My stomach turned. Heather's voice dropped. "You think she suspects?" Nah, Reed muttered. "She's too grateful we let her stay." Let her stay. I pressed my hand flat to the counter, steadying myself. The tile felt cold and unfamiliar, like the rest of this house. The house I had helped them buy when Reed was drowning in student loans. The same house where they now stashed me like a spare coat in the closet. They claimed me on their taxes as a dependent, but couldn't claim me at their table. Couldn't claim me with kindness. After Reed's back surgery 2 years ago, I came with a suitcase, a tin of oatmeal cookies, and the promise that I'd stay just until he could lift Sadie again. I never left. Somewhere between appointments and tantrums and laundry cycles, my own life faded into theirs. But before all that, before Heather's sighs and Reed's silence, I had something of my own. After my husband passed, I'd picked up my needle and thread and started making dolls. Not just any dolls, soft-bodied, hand-stitched with embroidered eyes and tiny stitched smiles. I made them from scraps, from old shirts and worn curtains. I sold them at Saturday markets and online, wrapped in brown paper with handwritten notes. They'd kept me afloat. Not just financially, spiritually. They reminded me I could still make something beautiful. I hadn't touched a needle since moving in. The sewing kit had followed me here, packed in hope and left under the bed like a relic. That night, after the kids were asleep and the dishwasher had hummed its last rinse, I knelt beside the bed and pulled it out. The tin creaked open just as I'd left it. Threads in every color. My fabric scissors. A worn thimble. Even a few unfinished heads still soft and unstuffed. I ran my fingers over the cotton, the velvet, the burlap. My thumb paused on a swatch of floral fabric I'd meant to turn into a skirt for a springtime doll. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just felt present, like I'd shaken hands with a version of myself I'd forgotten. I chose 3 fabrics and folded them neatly, slipped them into the bottom of my suitcase, then the thimble, then the scissors, the needle roll wrapped in string. When I zipped the suitcase shut, it didn't feel like packing. It felt like reclaiming. Reed and Heather were still upstairs, probably watching a crime drama and pretending they weren't stealing someone's dignity. I turned off the light. My hands steady my breath quiet. Tomorrow I'd begin sewing again, just not in this house. I woke before the sun. The house was still except for the soft creak of the old floorboard near the hall. I'd memorized which ones to avoid. I dressed in silence, comfortable shoes, my warmest sweater, and the earrings Sadie had made me 2 birthdays ago, before her parents taught her to look through me. The suitcase was already by the door, zipped and waiting. My sewing kit nestled inside, alongside the bare essentials. Everything else I left behind. In the kitchen, I brewed one last pot of coffee. Not for them. For me. I drank it at the table, watching the sky shift from gray to pale orange. Then I picked up a pen and a sticky note from the junk drawer. I wrote the words slowly, carefully, in the same looping cursive my late husband used to love. You won't need to claim me next year. I stuck it to the salt shaker. Reed would see it when he made his eggs. Or maybe Heather would, while hunting for her oat milk creamer. I didn't write my name. They'd know. My phone buzzed once. A message from Miriam out front. Miriam had been a friend back when I still went to craft fairs, back when I still had stories to tell that didn't end with silence. We hadn't spoken in months, but when I called yesterday, just said, I think I need to go. She didn't ask for details. She just said, yes. I didn't look back as I stepped outside. The morning was crisp, the driveway damp from last night's drizzle. Miriam popped the trunk without a word. I placed the suitcase in, climbed into the passenger seat, and closed the door behind me. She glanced at me, once nodded, and started the engine. We drove in silence, past the rows of manicured lawns and mailboxes. I exhaled. Not relief, not regret. Just release. By noon, I was standing in a narrow stairwell, unlocking the door to a second-floor apartment above a dusty old toy shop. The windows were dirty. The floorboards creaked. But the space was mine. The apartment above the toy shop had slanted ceilings and chipped paint, but it also had something Reed and Heather's house never did: quiet. I swept the dusty wood floors, pushed a second-hand table beneath the biggest window, and laid out my fabrics like old friends returning from a long trip. That first week, I made a single doll. Her dress was too loose, her hair slightly uneven. But her eyes, stitched in navy thread, not the kind you see on royal uniforms, but deep like ocean storms, held something true. By the second week, I'd made 5 more. A teacher doll with glasses, a boy in corduroy overalls, a girl in a sunflower skirt. My fingers remembered the rhythm, and soon I didn't need to sketch before I stitched. I just knew. I opened a small Etsy shop and called it Second Stitch, because that's what I was giving myself. A second go. A second purpose. A second life made one seam at a time. At first, it was just a few sales, one to Ohio, another to Portland. Then a message came in from a college student who'd bought the sunflower doll. She asked if she could post about it. I said yes, assuming it'd get a handful of likes. 3 days later, my inbox had 200 messages. The video had gone viral, something about the grandma who sews healing into every stitch. People wrote things like, "I haven't felt comfort like this since my mother passed and I ordered for my daughter, but kept it for myself. I couldn't keep up. I bought more fabric." Miriam came over with cookies and helped pack boxes. The post office clerk asked if I was running a toy factory. I didn't answer. I just smiled. In the middle of the night, I sat by the window, hands resting in my lap. The room smelled of lavender and cotton. Orders were still coming in. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like someone's leftover. I felt like someone's purpose. Then a message arrived from an old neighbor back in Reed's neighborhood. It had been almost 2 months since I left Reed's house. Long enough for my body to forget the constant weight of tiptoeing around their moods. Long enough for my hands to grow calloused again from hours of stitching. I was wrapping a doll in tissue paper when my phone buzzed. Nancy next door. "Hey, Clarabelle. Weird one. Got mail here for you. Looks like something from the IRS. My breath caught. I hadn't listed Reed's address on anything official in years. Nancy sent a photo. It was a pale brown envelope, clearly government issued, addressed to me, but sent to my son's house. There it was, my full name in block letters. My social. I knew instantly they were still using me. Claiming me on their taxes. Getting a benefit they didn't deserve. I stared at the image for a long time. My first instinct was to call, to rage, to demand answers. But rage would be wasted on people who never heard anything that didn't benefit them. I simply replied to Nancy, "Please return to sender." Return to, "That's not my address anymore." She said, "Okay, no questions." I liked that about Nancy. I set the phone down and turned back to my table. A doll sat waiting to be finished, brown hair in pigtails, soft denim overalls, a tiny felt heart sewn onto the front pocket. I added a little red thread around the shoes, a touch of warmth that made her feel brave. When she was done, I didn't list her for sale. Instead, I tied a tag around her wrist, made by someone once called useless. Then I wrapped her gently and boxed her up for the local children's hospital. They would never know who I was. They didn't need to, but I knew. I was not a tax benefit, not a dependent, not a burden shuffled to the back room. I was the woman who walked away and made something beautiful with her silence. And that silence, it was only just beginning. Miriam came by that morning with 2 coffees and a quiet look on her face. She didn't get the loan, she said, handing me the cup. "Heather, her boutique. It's shut down." I paused mid-stitch. Not because I was surprised, but because I wasn't. They'd already missed 2 rent payments, Miriam continued. Landlord changed the locks yesterday. I didn't ask how she knew. Our town was small and word moved quickly when pretty storefronts turned dark. I stirred cream into my coffee and nodded. Miriam didn't press. She never did. She just sat across from me and helped sort buttons by color. By noon, I was alone again. The sun cast long bars of light through the window onto my work table. I was sewing a doll with auburn braids and wire-framed glasses. She looked like someone who knew the truth and kept it folded neatly in her pocket. My laptop chimed. An email from Reed. Subject, urgent. Please call. I stared at it for a full minute. My finger hovered over the trackpad. Then I clicked the tiny box beside it. Moved it to trash. No anger. No second thoughts. Just deleted. Whatever storm was brewing over there wasn't mine to contain. They had called me useless, and now suddenly, I was necessary again. The subtext was always the same. You matter when we need something. But I wasn't theirs to summon anymore. I pulled the next fabric square from my stash, a pale green cotton with little white stars. It would make a perfect skirt. I threaded the needle again, steady and slow. The hum of the town below floated up through the open window. Distant traffic, a child's laugh, a shop bell. all reminders that life continued, that healing didn't need permission. I didn't reply. I didn't explain. I just kept sewing. Let the silence speak. The stack of mail on the hallway shelf was mostly junk flyers menus, a reminder from the dentist I hadn't seen in years. But one envelope stopped me. Bright purple crayon marks, looping stars drawn on the corners. My name, Grandma Clarabelle, written in shaky, determined letters. No return address. Just the unmistakable handwriting of a 7-year-old who used to curl up beside me at bedtime, clutching one of my dolls like it could protect her from everything. I carried it to the kitchen table and opened it with care, sliding the letter out like it was something sacred. Inside was a folded sheet of notebook paper, a few uneven lines. Grandma, I miss your stories. I miss your dolls. Mommy says you're busy. I hope you're not mad. I love you. Sadie. The tears came so fast I didn't even try to stop them. I pressed the paper to my chest and closed my eyes, letting the ache move through me without shame. Sadie. She had always listened, always noticed. When I was invisible to the others, she had seen me sat at my feet with wide eyes and open hands. But I didn't write back. Not because I didn't want to, because I needed to be sure that when she remembered me, it wasn't with confusion or guilt. I went to my work table and chose the softest cream-colored fabric I owned. I stitched a doll with Sadie's favorite features, braided brown yarn hair, a pink cotton dress with stitched daisies, and a felt book sewn into her arms. A story doll. Then I wrapped it carefully in tissue, tucked it in a sturdy white box, and sealed it with tape. On the top, I wrote in bold, clean script, "For Sadie, when you're old enough to understand." I didn't mail it. I slid it onto the highest shelf in my closet, where time could keep it safe, where love could wait. Then I returned to the table, wiped my cheeks, and began again. The reporter had called it a small-town spotlight, just a piece for the weekend lifestyle section. She came by with a notebook and kind eyes, asking questions no one had asked me in years. What inspired you to start making dolls again? I told her a little truth and left the rest in the seams. By Sunday, the article was out. From discarded grandmother to viral doll maker. Meet Oregon's own Clarabelle Vance. It was meant to be local, but people shared it. More than I expected. Orders doubled, then tripled. I was standing in the shop window adjusting a display when I saw them. Reed and Heather, parked across the street. Heather in oversized sunglasses. Reed with his arms crossed, shifting from foot to foot like a teenager caught skipping school. Then they crossed. Stood outside the shop door. Didn't knock. Just waited. I didn't move. I could see their lips moving through the glass. Reed said something. Heather tilted her head like she was posing for forgiveness. I stepped back behind the curtain. No drama, no performance. Just silence. I didn't owe them tears or explanations or entry. They hadn't read my letters. They hadn't listened when I spoke. They only heard the headlines. They only showed up when I was someone. The same hands they once mocked for sewing scraps were now a story worth chasing. They stayed for 10 minutes, maybe less, then walked back to their car. I didn't watch them leave. I returned to my table, placed a soft velvet hat on the head of the newest doll, and smiled. She was going to a little girl in Kansas who had sent me a thank you card with glitter on the corners. That kind of love was quiet, pure, and real. Let Reed and Heather knock. Let them search for cracks in a wall they built themselves. They weren't getting back in. The air was crisp as I walked up the hospital steps, arms full of another donation box. Inside, 12 dolls, each one different. One had pigtails and freckles. Another wore a tiny handmade sweater. One was bald soft with wide embroidered eyes, for a little girl who'd lost her hair but not her fight. The nurse at the counter smiled when she saw me. "Clarabelle," she said, "you've got fans in every ward." I handed over the box, and nodded, heart full but steady. No spotlight, no camera. Just me and the work. Back home, the wind had knocked a few leaves against the door. I bent down to sweep them aside and found something else. A white envelope. Slid underneath. My name written in Reed's handwriting. No stamp, no return address. Just his pen, my name, and the same silence he'd used to ignore me for years. I stood there for a moment, the letter in my hands. Then I walked to the bookshelf in the back room, opened a box. Inside was the letter from Sadie, the one with the crayon stars. I placed Reed's envelope beside it. No anger, no tears, just clarity. Some words don't need to be read to be understood. Back at the shop, I pinned up a new sign on the door. Simple, honest, mine, handmade, undervalued, unforgotten. It stayed there even after sunset, when the windows glowed with lamplight and the shelves stood full of soft creations. I brewed a cup of coffee and sat by the window with my notebook. Wrote a new idea for a doll, a grandmother with silver thread hair and a needle in her hand, not bending, not broken, just beginning again. I didn't need a reply from the people who once looked through me, because now, even in silence, I was seen. And for the first time in a long while, I smiled and meant it.